Before we put the lash adjusters in, we fill all the little pockets with motor oil. So the cam chain tensioner is in place, and we bled the little hydraulic valve lash adjusters, and I showed that in a previous clip. Put the rocker arm retainer strips in and put the rocker arms all in place here. The next step is to install the cams. We slid the cams through the chains and the sprockets. Put the 4 cam retainers on, and they're all marked for their particular corner. And now we're just finishing up putting about 10 or 11 foot-pounds on all the bolts. I've already done these, but we're just double checking. That's done. Once these are all torqued and sort of double checked, we'll go on to setting the valve timing, the cam, make sure the cams are in the right place. Kind of a pain in the ass, but helps to have that in place, or otherwise you bend all the valves. Oil lines installed, cam chain guide installed, everything torqued. I read the manual, and there's these little chambers are called anti-foaming chambers, which are supposed to be pre-filled with motor oil before the engine starts. I guess it's a place maybe for the air to come out of the oil so that the valve train gets a good shot of air. So we'll fill these as applicable. This is 1040 motorcycle oil I'm filling everything with. So it's been a matter of many months since the last episode of the Nighthawk repair project. Sorry about that. We got on to other things and winter came along. We raced snowmobiles, we rode snowmobiles, we vacationed, all sorts of things. But it's now end of May, and got caught up on yard work in the acreage, and it's time to get this bike running. Now, as luck would have it, we did get the engine back in the bike, fired it up, and it actually ran very quiet. I was quite happy with the way it ran. It was monstrously flooded when we originally tried to start it because of all the oil and mung I had in the cylinders. But it did start and run very smoothly. It smoked, but I think that'll burn off after a while. But as luck would have it, as I said, we had a massive oil leak from the angle drive where the transmission connects to the drive shaft, or the shaft drive. And I know what happened. The gasket was poor. I couldn't get in there to change it easily enough. I took a mechanic shortcut, and now I'm paying for it. Now, fortunately, I think I have a plan that I can fix the oil leak without pulling the engine and splitting the bottom end again. That would be a real crime, but if we have to, I guess we have to. So I'll show you in a little more detail what we're trying to accomplish this morning. Now here's the output shaft to angle drive. There's a couple bevel gears in here that drive the drive shaft, and that cover we had to loosen off when we split the crankcase, and the engine was out of the frame and upside down, as you saw earlier. The oil leak is where the crankcases separate, and it's just back in here behind where the clutch is. I can see where it was seeping out, and it was leaking so bad even when you're cranking the engine over it was leaking. So it's obviously an oil pressure point there. Now I tried to get in arthroscopically and try to pull the cover out and see if I could fix it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get in past the alternator. I disassembled the alternator, and lo and behold, there's the hub is on a tapered shaft. That output shaft is on a taper, and you need the special service tool from Honda to pull that. Now it turned out, I'm quite certain it's 16 millimeter 1.5 pitch thread, which I couldn't find around here. So Trevor at LeQuay Welding, he saves my bacon very, very often, made me up a little puller for this. So we're going to see if we can get this part of the alternator off, loosen the angle drive, get in there, see if we can repair the gasket somehow from the outside, and hope and pray that we don't have an oil leak when we fire it up again. Now here's the puller that Trevor made for me. It's a piece of hexi bar put in the lathe, center drilled and turned down to the major diameter, 16 millimeter, and then threads cut. He says it's no big deal, but I think it's an absolute work of art. So we'll write that down on the account, Trevor, for sure. Now in order to extend the puller, rather than grind the threads off or put this in the lathe and take the threads off to get in to the final bore, I just made a little pusher bolt. It's a grade 8 bolt. It shouldn't twist. I don't think this is really going to be hard to pop off, but so we fabricated that just the right length. That goes in there, and a little bit of lube on the puller always makes a big difference. So let's see what happens here. And the thread fits perfectly. It's not going in. There we go. Quite as far as I'd hoped. Right. Let's see what we can do. I don't know if this is going to be have to be something with the impact wrench. I'm reluctant to do that. And there we are. Always nasty when those things pop. But that's more of an automotive alternator. This thing must put out a lot of wattage for lights and so forth. Save the whole pusher bolt for next time. So the back alternator housing cover fits with an O-ring into this hole, and there's our output bearing. Now I had to tap it off from the back side and use a little heat. I didn't have any idea how that came apart. Now I hope we can put it back together. It looks like it is meant to pop off. But anyway, there we are down to the brass tacks. I can see the seam where it's leaking, so we'll go ahead and loosen the angle drive off. I think it'll move out. I think now this oil line could possibly get lost and give us a little more room. Good enough. Now we will loosen off a few bolts and just see what happens. We'll start by taking this little oil line off. I know it's going to have very tiny, teeny little sealing washers. I think our wiring harness could get out of the way a little bit too. There it goes. I think at my advanced stage of age, I think I'm going to take up brain surgery. I've got the tools, got some sharp knives, and I'm just trying to see where the gap in this gasket is. Let's see, it appears to be right there. If I could just get something in there, all our lives would be much better. So I think what actually happened was where I cut the gasket to split the cases, and then of course I couldn't see in there because the alternator was still in place. The gasket folded over. There, it's loose now. And there's little 1/8 inch or 3/6 inch gap in that gasket. And because there must be oil pressure right there, the oil line is right there. There must be considerable amount of flow there. And I don't think it's going to take a bunch to seal, but I guess nothing ventured, nothing gained. It does a little bit less painful than pulling the engine again. I'm much better at doing things the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time. Okay, so we have cut the perfect little piece of gasket. It fits within a micron of the others, right? Now the question comes, what silicone do we use? Do we use JB Weld, or 3-bond, or black? I'm using black because the Honda's black, but it's a good grade of stuff. Pretty damn snug. This last one is only a 6mm bolt, so we're taking a little bit easier on him. And there. And so we're sort of struggling with our alternator housing here. Trying to get the shaft back into place and then the collar to go around it. So we rigged up a puller, or a pusher, I guess. And I think it's going in. I certainly don't want to crack this complex little housing. There is an O-ring in there, so we hope he survives as well. We'll not only have one oil leak, we'll have two. So I think that's basically got it. Hopefully. It's not quite seated in there, but damn close. Okay, the moment of truth. I've sprayed some brake clean in the questionable area and blew it off with air. So everything's dry in there right now. And I think we're safe to crank this engine over. It certainly won't run without carburetors, but okay, key on. Here it goes. Well, we're cautiously optimistic. Now the true test will be when the motor's running. But so far I don't see any leaks, and it did leak when it was cranking before. As I said, cautiously optimistic. So we'll put the rest of this crap together and wrestle the carbs on. This is my third, fourth, fifth favorite job. See if we can go for test drive today. A little dab of oil on the taper won't hurt, because we're bound to be in here doing all this again. How's that for optimism? Now I believe this went on like so. The alternator windings. How did this go now? Something like that. The other half of the rotor. The big cooling turbine. We'll give that a little bit of torque. Don't know how much. Not like a P85 Polaris clutch, I don't think. Okay. the back of the housing didn't quite pull together, so I'm just going slow here, trying to pull it in. Looks like we're seated there. Right. Hook up some of the electrics. Here's the, I'm sure this is the lighting coil. Alternator output. Okay. I always found it frustrating to get 4 cylinders into 4 carb flanges at the same time, let alone get them into the airbox, which is loosened off and pulled back as far as it'll go, but I don't know if we're better off taking the boots out of the carb box or the air box, but anyway, I've always found it useful to warm all these stiff old rubbers up. Give that a try. Okay, we had it running, and again I didn't turn the camera on, and our leak in question is either fixed or much better. There's a little bit of seepage there. It could be coming from elsewhere. We had a fair bit of smoke off the exhaust, but they were all oily. So I'm again cautiously optimistic, but the next problem is now our carbs want to drip a little bit, as you can see there. Number 2 was gushing, so the needle valves in there are varnished up and sticky. The carbs have been sitting on the bench for a while and no new fuel for them. That we can handle without starting a fire. But as I was concentrating on this side of the engine, I saw smoke coming from the front, and we had a fairly big oil leak here. And if you can see in there, the gasket, the valve cover gasket is pushed out. Now it was kind of stretched and generally shitty before I put that together. So I'm going to take it apart, take a look at it. I think we could probably treat ourselves to a new gasket there. But engine ran good. It fired on all 4 cylinders. We had heat on all 4 pipes, and of course it's smoking. At this point we're pretty happy. So we'll tear the valve cover off, the coils and the braces, and we're getting really, really good at doing this part of the job. So within a minute we'll take a look in there. And happily it threads in absolutely perfectly. And there's my nemesis, the phone.